everyone. I'm Rita McGrath, and welcome to this edition of our Thought Sparks podcast. And today we have a special treat for you, something a little different. The performer, professor, founder of Honor and Heal, and otherwise just amazing person, Chesney Snow. So welcome.
Hi, Rita. Thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be here. We've been really excited to talk with you. Enjoyed meeting with you back here on campus. So that's last year, I think.
Yeah, it was last year.
Yeah.
So I was a part of the Keller Center's Innovation Day when they, at Princeton, when the student teams and professor teams and people associated with the university have startups. And Chesney, you won for performing the piece.
Yeah.
Maybe start there. Maybe tell us a little bit about that project, because I think it's very linked to a lot of your.
Yes, it is. So performing the piece is a project that I started working on with a collaborator and a friend of mine when I was going down to Memphis, and she had set up this project called Performing the Piece, which would go into communities and work with law enforcement and people who, have had incarceration histories or justice histories, and really use theater in this very practical way to bring these disparate groups together, in a way that focused on empathic healing and listening. And this had been the kind of work that I had been wanting to do for a long time, and we kind of found each other. And I said, I really want to continue this work, and I really want to envision and expand and see what this would look like if it were, brought into the intersection of technology and the humanities. And I started to, work here at Princeton on, how do we reimagine these nonprofits, or the concept of a nonprofit, right? Because I've been working in nonprofits for a while, and they seem to be, unsustainable long term, many of them, especially a lot of the stronger startups. And so I started to say, well, maybe I should start thinking about this in a different perspective and looking at, what market is this serving? It's a very underserved market. State and local governments spend right around like 135 billion every year, on training, right? And some of that is like mandatory continued training. And so I started to think, well, what if we took applied theater, right, and started to integrate it into this training to develop empathic listening skills? And I've just been on that journey since then. It's been a couple of years now. And so Honor and Heal is what this has really kind of evolved to.
Oh, okay.
So, because performing the piece is kind of the overall structure of the kind of theater and the performing. And then we started to think about, well, what are we doing in these workshops, especially as we brought in military veterans and just other groups, that are really in need of wellness and kind of like mental health that can basically kind of get them in touch with empathy, not just with others, but empathy for the self. So yeah, I know that's a lot.
No, I think it's a fascinating story, but maybe for our listeners, we should start off with your own background, which is absolutely fascinating. You had to leave Chicago, as I gather, under some full circumstances.
Yes, absolutely.
Grew up in Wisconsin, is that right? Where
I often say I grew up in the Oklahoma, Wisconsin, Illinois, Mississippi, North Carolina, Arizona area. And so, we moved around a lot, but I went to high school in Wisconsin, and that was a very, very formative time for me, because I was just becoming a teenager. And then we had a lot of, I think, challenges, because we didn't, if we had moved from Mississippi, and my family was from Mississippi. And for many people who don't know, Mississippi is a beautiful, rich land of culture and music, but it also has a really horrible legacy of poverty. It was a state that really at one point in time was wealthier than Manhattan, right? It's crazy to believe that that's how much wealth existed from the slave trade and cotton and the antebellum period. But now, today, it's one of the poorest states in the Union. And so when we went to Wisconsin, my mother was a single mom, and she was really trying to make find her way. And we ended up in this shelter for women, and so it was really a place that I think just every community truly needs, a place where people feel safe, where children, and families as a whole, like families, can feel safe. As a matter of fact, I go back to that shelter at least every other year to either perform or to try to help them raise money. They just built a big new facility, so it's really great to see their success, called Family Advocates. And so they really advocated the family. And so my mom was able to really do these superhuman feats. I saw her kind of go from there to working a job, getting enough money to buy her first home, and just really kind of, did these kind of superhuman feat from my perspective as a young kid. And so I took that work ethic to heart. And went out in the world and sought to do the impossible, which it seems to be possible. So,
You seem to be doing pretty well. So you studied theater at
yeah,
McGrath, is that right?
yes, that's right. Yeah,
and then I gather spent some time trying to get into the acting business.
yeah, I did. I guess I was in the acting business, and then I started to say, I had this kind of epiphany one day during a particular audition, and I went into audition, and the casting director was like, "Oh, we need you to make this sandwich sexy. The sandwich is sexy, and it's a sexy sandwich." And so, I'm looking into the camera, and and I know what this person means, but I don't eat these sandwiches, and I don't think this sandwich is sexy, and why am I here? So I had this kind of just moment where I said, it was actually a moment of heartbreak, because you had spent so much of your energy and training and passion from a kid, wanting to tell stories and have stories, and then you're kind of faced with this part of the industry that it's that's not the story I want to tell. And so you're like, how am I going to make money? How am I going to make a living? Because most people, I think as performers, it's kind of ingrained. You're telling other people's stories a lot of the times. And sometimes those stories are amazing and move us to shift the world and be inspired. And sometimes they're trying to make us sexy sandwich. And so I said, I've got to really start focusing on the work that I want to do, and not think about acting as just the business, but to really hone myself into the passion of it. And so that was when I started to really use theater as a way to just fulfill my intellectual curiosity. Sorry about that. I thought I turned that off. My intellectual curiosity, but I had this beatboxing thing that I could do. And so I was like, okay, I'll go make beatboxing sexy. And so then I went out and started beatboxing, and that started to give, help me be able to pay bills and live as an artist. But I always kept theater as a central part of myself as an artist. So when people see me, they say, "Oh, you do a little spoken word, or you do the beatbox." Or, most people probably know me from beatboxing, but it's just hip hop culture and hip hop theater really as a whole that really kind of became the air that I breathe, and that which sustains me, because I think I've always wanted to give, a friend of mine, Bobby Lopez, and his wife Kristen Anderson Lopez, good friends of mine. Bobby's famous for Avenue Q and Book of Mormon, and of course, he and his wife did Frozen. And so I remember one time he came to speak to my students, and he said that. Well, one of the students asked him, said, well, what was the moment that you found success, um, or that made you successful? And he said it was very interesting. He said it was when I realized that my work was in service of other people, right? That it wasn't about showing the world how incredible, how great I am, but it's about showing how you can actually use your work to help make others great, right? And so if you're doing it from that sense of service, then you kind of you elevate in many ways. You become more valuable, right? Because your work is really truly making people's lives better. And so that's kind of at the core of what I feel Honor and Heal does, and really what the humanities do as a whole. And I think, finding this intersection where technology and the humanities can kind of really work together, as opposed to kind of always thought of in these kind of silos where one is just kind of like, museums and entertainment. But in reality, art is a very, very functional part of our human existence. Whether you're talking about, the therapies that happen through music therapy, or dance movement therapy, or art therapy. And so I feel like there are ways in which the spaces can really guide each other, because, if you look at a lot of the tech that we use and that we have, a lot people spend a lot of money on, say, a device because it can play music, because they can watch videos, they can look at photos, or they can even make photos and videos and music with these devices. So I think that there's going to be, I think the more we move forward with technology, especially with things like AI, a real understanding of the value of human connection and what that human connection really means when it's intersecting with technology, and even when it's just one-on-one, like we have right now, you and me.
Yeah, and indeed, and I think that's super important. And we read so much about how people are feeling lonely, they're feeling
Yeah.
disconnected, they're feeling they don't have a sense of community. We had that book Bowling Alone some years back, and things haven't gotten a lot better. So I think what you're doing in the sense of this human connection is just so important and so key. And I don't know that we do enough to nurture it.
Yeah, I think we don't. And I think that's one of the sicknesses that we have happening. Tracy Chapman has this great lyric in a song. The great Tracy Chapman, one of America's great songwriters, says, why, when there's so many of us, are there people still alone? And I think that's kind of one of the important parts of this project that we're doing with Honor and Heal, is because, at its core, it's about empathic listening and developing that skill to listen. And so when a person feels like they've been heard, it really does feel akin to being loved, right? Which is a great quote. I forgot who said it. But it's really, I think, at its core, one of our strongest assets, as a community. And so right now, with Honor and Heal, we just came back from Detroit, where we're going to be working. We're talking with them now about, how we can develop some of this work with them, and other agencies, whether it's law enforcement agencies or social work agencies. We just want to be able to go into our community, and use the human connection to kind of repair dialogue and to start to heal our communities. But we also know that there's a, you know, there, there it has to kind of support itself, right? It can't just be relying upon um, charity. It needs to actually be sustainable, and so that's when this kind of intersection happens, where with ed tech and ed technology, we can, we can use technology for good or we can use it for bad,
Sure.
right? It's not really, I think of I don't really look at it as neutrals. You're either going to use it for one or the other, in my mind. And so I want to be able to try to use these technologies for good, to see, how do we actually use these technologies in ways that actually serve us, and bring us together and give, we have all of this data. We've almost kind of become data machines as a species, right? And so I want to try to see if we can use this data to actually help law enforcement officers. Because if you look at law enforcement officers, they have a very high suicide rate. They have, many challenging home lives, according to the statistics, with it, whether it's the divorce or, again, the mental health rate. And unfortunately, the culture as a whole of law enforcement is not really historically supported the idea of mental health. It's just not kind of embedded in that culture. And so, I think one of the things that we can, really study is the effect that these kind of high stress jobs, whether you're talking about an EMT or first responders, or you're talking about law enforcement, or even firefighters, that the way that we can actually study and help these officers with the technology that we have, better prepare themselves for a lot of the mental health challenges that come along with such a high stress job. And I think that we can do that through the applied theater arts.
I love that. I love that. So before we go there, because I would like you to walk me through what an engagement might look like. I think people would find that interesting. For just a second, how did you go from this kid living in like 8 different states to being on the faculty of Princeton University?
Well, that's a huge journey. I never thought that I would, be here. Like I was saying, right before the pandemic, I was kind of living the life as a performer, and I was going through, I would say kind of like autopilot. It's like, okay, this next month is Carnegie Hall. It's my 3rd time at Carnegie Hall. It's like, it's amazing, right? And I'm kind of going
through the first a cappella Broadway shows. Is that right?
Yeah. Now that was, that was incredible. An incredible journey, to my first time working on Broadway, and just to see the intricacies of what goes into making a musical, like the time that goes into it. You're talking about years and years. I mean, like every Broadway show is essentially a startup, like it's, and oh my gosh, I remember going into like the interview. Well, actually, I remember how I got in touch with that show. So I had just finished doing this project called I Choose, which was this little musical produced by Herbie Hancock and SGI in New York City. And we would go into these schools, and they had kind of written this play and with this little musical. It's like a 30-minute musical about conflict resolution, about like how do you how can teens make different choices. It was actually called I Choose. And so Herbie Hancock was, like I said, producing this thing. And I was really honored to be a part of it. I was like the spoken word teacher, amongst this class. And it was, and so anyway, so at the end of that project, I was going home, and I was coming out from the underground on the train, and I got a phone call saying, we've got this musical, And one of the guys who's a friend of yours recommended you because he couldn't do it, and we've got to do it like tomorrow, right? And because they were going to present it for these producers, great Tom Vertel and a host of producers through primary stages. And so I said, well, send me the script and I'll take a look at it. And so I read the script and I was like, oh wow, this is my part. This is the one. This is the one. And so, as an actor in New York, I had been kind of working my way through the kind of, I guess you call it the off, off scene, since I literally, yes, exactly. Um, really, literally, since I stepped foot in New York City. I arrived in New York City on a Greyhound bus from Arizona with like $1,000 in my pocket, and I said, I'm going to make it. Well, anyway, I was
beatboxing at that point.
Well, no, I wasn't beatboxing at that point when I first made it to New York. I first made it to New York. I had finished doing summer stock. I had done Julius Caesar. Well, I wasn't Julius Caesar himself. I was in the ensemble, because I was young. But I was playing in that play, and one of the actors, Stafford Price Clark, was he was playing Mark Antony. And so anyway, so he said, hey, listen, I've got a place. You could stay at my place in New York. You should move to New York. Me and my wife, Erin, are going to be kind of out doing summer stock, and just, stay there and you'll find a place. And I was like, I'm going to take that offer up, and so I had like $1,000 in my pocket. And so I went to New York, and I was in Astoria, Queens, if you're familiar with Astoria, Queens. And I guess it was like 11 o'clock at night, right? And I was walking back from the store and I heard footsteps behind me, right? And so I turn around, and there's two guns in my face, right?
Ew.
And yeah, two guns from these two. I mean, they had to have been teenagers. And I was like, no, that's impossible. Like, I just got off the bus, man. I just got off the bus. And so nothing happened. They didn't really get anything because I had a debit card. But I said to myself then, right, if that's all that New York has, I'm gonna take the city by storm. And if I could survive that, I'm gonna survive anything. Like, that didn't faze me. And the next day I was kind of looking for an apartment. And in New York at that time, they had these things called telephone booths. Right. Today they're called urinals. They're called like public urinals in New York, but they used to be called telephone booths. Right. And so they had these like, things that you could tear off to like take guitar lessons or have an apartment. And so anyway, so there was one for an apartment that was uptown on like 207th Street for $750 a month. Okay. A 1-bedroom apartment. And so I ran uptown to meet this guy, and he shows me the apartment. I mean, the apartment is huge. Now, mind you, this is an apartment for $750 a month in Manhattan. Okay.
Wow.
And so I'm like, well, I'll take it. And so he's the man is kind of like this older Irish looking man, short guy with these really beautiful cold blue eyes. And he said, no, I'm going to talk to you. We're going to go to this diner. So we go to this diner, and he says, I usually rent this apartment out to like Columbia students or Juilliard students or whoever is, like students who are in town. And he's like, well, what brings you to New York? And I said, well, I came here to be an actor. And I was like, and he's like, oh, interesting. He's like, I'm an actor. And I'm like, okay, great. Everybody's an actor. I've got that in my mind. And so he rents the apartment to me, and then I go to Times Square to buy myself a computer, $500 for, something that probably would have cost 200, because I'm a kid. And I look this guy up, and he's like actually this actor who has been performing for like over 40 decades. His first film was in 59 with I think Harry Belafonte, and then he just kind of had this enormous career. He was in all the Godfather films. His name was Richard Bright, and Richard Bright kind of became my mentor. Got me my first audition, got me my first show. So my first like kind of off show was a show called Golden Boy by Clifford Odets, and we were like right next to what was the Signature Theater. And the Signature Theater at that time, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm missing that actor's name, but very famous actor, Ed Norton. So Edward Norton was performing in the theater next door, and I mean, oh my God, even though I was off, I was like, I've made it, I mean, like Edward Norton is performing next door, and I'm in the play right next door. So yeah, it was a magical time, coming up in New York, as an artist, as an actor, as a storyteller. And so I really just kind of, I think over the course of many years, as I was kind of performing and I was able to kind of tour around the world and stuff, I've noticed that there's a power in the stories. I slowly started to begin to understand the real power of stories, and the real power of the creative economy. The more that I would kind of see a neighborhood like Williamsburg, for example, in Brooklyn, Williamsburg, when I was first there, it was just these kind of dingy music bars. And so the music became such a powerful force that everyone from New York City would find themselves heading to Williamsburg on any given night to hear bands and to hear music and to see performances and art. And so it's that community then started to become the hip, cool place to be. So what was an industrial area that was kind of just a wasteland in many ways, right? Because that's where the artists were going, to the places that were the cheapest to live. All of a sudden started springing up these, huge condos and beautiful restaurants and just like this kind of community started to build. And yeah, that's when I really started to think about the power of what I did artistically, outside of just performing. And so as I had become, I guess, a kind of popular beatboxer in the world, I realized, well, what I should probably do is to kind of use that, to build to help build the beatboxing community.
Mm-hmm.
and to I founded the American Beatboxing Championships. And so that was really, I guess, my first time like, okay, now I'm going to try to run a business, right? And get sponsorships and sell tickets and learn the internet and learn how to, write HTML code. And like you as an artist, I think one of the benefits, I think, of my generation of musical artists and theater artists is like, we had to learn how to do it all. We had to learn how to produce your own work. So I produced a film based on me producing this work. And then that film became a pretty popular music documentary called American Beatboxer, which was then put in all of these various famous archives and museums, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And then that gave me my first Harvard residency. And I said, I really want to, show that beatboxing is a fine art. And so I had been doing this work. I started in 2010. It was the first time that beatboxing was used as kind of a tool for speech therapy.
Oh,
Kind
oh,
of.
I didn't know that.
Mhm.
Oh, interesting.
So actually, me and a friend of mine, Taylor McFerrin, um, uh, James Kim, had started the kind of nonprofit. Taylor McFerrin being Bobby McFerrin's son,
Hmm.
and so we started going every week to the Bronx to teach these beatboxing classes at a place called the Lavelle School for the Blind. And so as that began to grow over the years, as we began to understand the kind of like the correlation between beatboxing and speech therapy, and how it can help speech therapists in their practice. And at this point now, there are studies about this, and the practice has grown. But that was really uh, the first time that I was really diving into the healing components, like in a very real way with the arts.
Mhm.
And so, that spawned, beatboxing apps and beatboxing videos, and really a whole nonprofit that was really kind of structured on these elements of hip hop culture that could be used in education. And so I kind of took that to Harvard and started doing a residency there. And so I did 3 residencies at Harvard over the course of 3 years. And then after that, I kind of just went back to my performing. I kind of I was kind of doing this teaching thing on the side over all of these years. So when I add up all of the years that I had been teaching, with whether it's theater arts or beatboxing or spoken word, I'd always been involved in arts education ever since the beginning of my career. And I would kind of go back and forth with, oh, I'm going to go on a State Department tour, or I'm going to go on a tour to Europe.
You were in Poland, right?
Yeah, I had a bit of a little career in Poland. I love Poland. It's a beautiful country and culture. So I went out there. I first went out there in 2005 to do MTV Unplugged, and it was the first MTV Unplugged in Central Europe, and that was with this brilliant artist named Kaya, who had done a show in Brooklyn, and my girlfriend at the time um, was her cousin, and so she took me to that show, and she basically said, "Hey," after I performed there in front of this big club, and she was like, "Hey, I want you to come over to Europe." And so that was my first time actually leaving the country ever, was to go to do MTV Unplugged in in,
Wow.
in Poland.
Not a
And
bad start.
not a bad start, yeah. And so I started to meet other artists in Poland, and started working on making music with them, and writing songs for some of their pop stars, and that kind of, that I would say that experience really taught me the value of ownership. The value that, like, if you're gonna make music, um, you want to own your music, and even though it might not give you the immediate like return, that there's value in that music is going to play over time. And the same thing happened with you know American Beatboxer. I think that was the catalyst that made me make the right decisions with American Beatboxer, because had I not had that understanding of owning your publishing, and making certain that you are um, kind of on top of understanding how you actually make money in music, then I would have made a very wrong deal for American Beatboxer, because when I needed to film American Beatboxer, I didn't have any money. Like, I was like, Where am I going to get money? Where am I going to get HD? Because at the time HD was new. So where am I going to get HD cameras, and how am I going to do this? And lo and behold, a big television company uh, came in and said, "We think what you're doing is amazing, and we want to give you a lot of publicity, a lot of promotion, and we'll put you on this big, you know, cable channel." And I was like, "Oh my God, that you're a dream come true. You're amazing. I mean, everything is going the way that I need it to go." And then, but because I understood my publishing, I read the contract, and I saw that the contract then said that if they film it, they're going to give me a copy of it, but that they're going to own it, not just in this universe, but in any other universe that might be discovered.
I love that phrase in those contracts.
You know,
Cracks me up. I know.
so I said, wow, any other universe? I said, this must be very valuable then if they're predicting the next universe. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to do what I need to do with this in order to make the film. And so I said, I appreciate the offer, but I'm gonna figure it out. And so we figured it out. We figured out how to get, two HD cameras. We figured out how to scrounge together, a couple $100 to film to actually film the footage that we needed. And it took a couple of years, but then that after we had made that final cut of the film, we started to do a lot of film festivals, and the film ended up becoming, I think, a seminal music documentary, which is why it's in all of those archives or whatnot. And it was really weird. Like, I didn't even when I got the news that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame wanted to place our movie in their museum of American music and culture, it didn't really dawn on me like what that meant at the time. It was just like, oh, that's cool. You know what I mean? And you just keep moving, because you're so often as an artist, you're trying to get to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And then over time, you just kind of look back and you're like, oh my God, I did that. Well, that was crazy, and so every moment, I think, now for me is really just about like trying to make sure that whatever the next generation of artists do, that they really do think about the value of their work. Because I think a lot of the times, like, we know that like a Leonardo is going to sell for whatever, $1 billion, right? But we I think very often we don't really think about the functionality of art and the value of art, and what that kind of creative process actually does for our well-being. I remember when it used to be this thing, and I guess when Silicon Valley was really kind of becoming popular in terms of like how their work culture was, right? Like that, they had like a little bar and a little room where you could nap and stretch and do yoga and do all of, you know what I mean? Like these to see how productive it would make their workforce, I think of our work somewhat in those veins, but a bit more targeted with the science, right? And a bit more, engaging with, how do we actually improve executive functioning? How do we improve well-being? Because I think at the core, that is what is going to continue to make us innovative. That's what's going to actually make our society, I think, function a bit better. I think right now we have a real loneliness epidemic when we don't need to be lonely. We can actually connect with people, but in this kind of weird, I think, consequence, that may have been, unknown, or is certainly maybe unintended, perhaps. Um, our technology, has kind of made us almost in our silos, actually separated from people, right? So instead of going to fly to go see that cousin or aunt or whoever, we can just see them on our social media and text them and kind of, and I think that we kind of carry those spaces into our workplaces, where we're all just kind of working, and maybe we see each other at a function or two, but are we really integrating ourselves with the very community that we're in? You
Oh,
know,
it's a huge issue. A
you know,
huge issue.
it's huge. You know, so yeah, I can talk for hours and hours. I hope I'm not rambling too
No,
much.
this is great. So, by the way, I'm on the board of McCarter Theater, which I know.
Oh, that's beautiful.
So I've been spending a fair amount of time thinking about the importance of live theater and what it means to come together and share a common experience, in real life. So your
Yeah.
words are definitely resonating with me. So tell me how you got to Princeton, and then I'd love to hear more about,
Wow.
what an
Yeah.
ideal engagement looks like.
Yeah, so I first came to Princeton to actually work at the McCarter. It was the first time that I was actually in Princeton. And I was like, Princeton's in New Jersey. I was so like, this is beautiful, Princeton. I didn't know, because it was almost this mythical place, Princeton, it's like, where is Princeton? And I think the reputation certainly deserves itself. It's a
Well,
beautiful town.
one of the things I love about Princeton is like all the surrounding towns, when anybody from any of those places gets asked where they live, they always say Princeton because everybody knows it. Nobody knows Montgomery or West
Oh
Windsor
yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
or any of those
Yeah,
places.
yeah. No, it's so true. It's so true. And like I live on Bayard Lane, so it's like that little road that
Gorgeous.
goes. Yeah, it's beautiful, beautiful. And like, but I'm like, there has to be a way to get that traffic. This town is too small for that much traffic that comes through there, But so it's such a interesting place because it's this small town feel for sure, but it has this like international cosmopolitan, right? It's a really magical place. I came here to do a show called Princeton and Slavery Plays at the McCarter,
Ah,
and I believe that was a project that Toni Morrison had really had kind of kickstarted. She was a huge force for the arts on campus, and so that was the first time that I came here, and I loved that experience of doing that play. I think there are archives online that people can see the information about that particular project. But then I was doing a show with with Jane Cox, who is a brilliant lighting designer. I was doing a show with her and a mutual uh, friend and one of my mentors, Ruben Santiago Hudson, and I was doing this play, and she was doing the lights. And I had always been doing like workshops and things like that, and I heard that I connected with Jane because I heard that she did some work at Princeton. And I was like, oh, I'd love to kind of come and do a workshop at your school. And then I think it was February 2020. I
wow.
came to do a workshop, a choreo poem workshop, and it was a beautiful success. And that was the first time that I had taught a class here, and then well taught a workshop, and then a couple of years later. I think Jane had kind of emailed some friends and said, there's this position at Princeton, and if we knew anybody, to please forward that, forward this email, because they were searching. And I said, that's a great idea. I'll forward this to myself, and I will go and apply for it. And I happen to just get blessed to really work at a beautiful place where you can, you know, um, you could see like art in a little bit of a different perspective. It's really looking at theater and art in its practice and how it affects our community and how we engage with it on a scholarly level as well as on a practitioner level, right? And so I fell in love with this place, and I started very early on to try to take the work that I've been doing in the community with theater into the space of of academia and trying to see if we can build a kind of like, I think at that time I was trying to create kind of like a residency that was kind of like a summer camp for bringing people of disparate ideologies and backgrounds together to enhance empathy. And then after I started to kind of think about it for a year, Princeton sent me to the Wharton school. They had this kind of like uh, 2-day seminar where they said, you should actually be thinking about how you're building your IP, like how you're building this in terms of its value in terms of the economy and business, and like, you can start a business from this. And I never, that was the first time that I was like, a business from because I like a non like a for profit, it was so foreign to me, because I was so rooted in kind of the nonprofit world, in the artist world. But I knew from owning my IP and taking, a couple of $100 and turning that into, over $100,000, through creating investments in that particular entity of the American Beatboxer, that you have to think about this work so that it's sustainable, and that film still provides income today, right? So 10 plus years later. And so I think that's kind of what started to make me do the work about understanding, who is the market. Well, the market is the $135 billion a year, right? That's being spent on training, right, of law enforcement agencies all over the country, right?
So tell us what a typical engagement might look like, if there is such a thing.
So a typical engagement would basically be where we identify community first, right, and then we look to see the various organizations and community stakeholders in that community, right? Um, and then we work to get partners to book out a space where veterans, military veterans, law enforcement officers, people who are dealing with justice histories, or in say housing facilities or foster care teenagers, and we bring a cohort of probably about 30 people or so, right, together with teaching artists and drama therapists and movement specialists. And then we work over the course of 4 days to essentially follow this kind of, well, it's an evidence-based method, where we're looking to actually create ensemble through the creative process, through the power of storytelling. Specifically looking at the reasoning behind that storytelling, right? The identity, and really beginning to develop these what we call empathic listening skills. And so over the course of that 4 days, the officers and the community would go about actually creating a small performance. That performance might be 10 minutes, it might be 20 minutes. And that performance is placed in front of the community members, family members, politicians, local politicians, can kind of come together and actually see the ensemble that was built between these people that did not know each other, that probably had very disparate kind of ideas about who the other person is, right? And they see these people working together to share these very intimate stories, and the power and the transformation that comes from that. I'm under the belief that education is not just about learning a skill or a task, right? It's a transformative process, right? A real education is a transformative process that allows for you to function at a higher level, right? than you were functioning before.
Mm.
Right. And so what we find is that, when we start to look at this through kind of like the latest neuroscience data, or studies rather, it there's a lot of evidence that kind of leans towards this type of work, helping not just officers but actual people functioning in their everyday life, especially as it relates to building in groups and actually using design thinking. So I think that, we've kind of, you know, begun to explore something that's not really explored. Like there's a lot of places that think about de-escalation training, right? That we want to de-escalate, we want to keep people safe. But often they're not really truly diving into the intricacies of these art therapies, right? They're kind of they're overlooked. I'll give you an example. Um, Back in I forget the exact date, but there was a comic woman named Gabby Gifford, right? And if you're familiar with Gabby Gifford, she was the victim of a mass shooting, where she was shot in the head, and she survived. Her her process for healing, of being able to uh, speak again, to walk again, uh, this was really made possible through the music therapy that she was that she was undertaking. This is how she, uh, because she played the French horn, uh, this was a pathway for her to uh, have the ability to begin to like rewire her brain, so that she could gain some functionality. And I think that if we look at that as like an extreme case, right, where music is being used to help repair such a traumatic injury, right? Um, what happens when we start to actually examine what it does on our everyday life, right? Where art is not just a kind of a luxury, but it is an actual fundamental part of our education, the same way that we think about mathematics, right? The same way that we think about saying the alphabet. As a matter of fact, remember, we teach children the alphabet by singing songs.
Right.
Like that's how they learn the alphabet, right? So our brains are kind of wired for this connection to other human beings, and that's ultimately what the humanities are about. The humanities are about understanding and searching deep within our humanity, right? And identifying with that aesthetic quality of it, identifying with the pain of it, identifying with all of these interconnections to other people, right? And in order for these systems, I think, to function, right, whether you're talking about people who are, charged with, pro- protecting people, right, protecting our communities, or you're dealing with people who are struggling with speech therapies. Art is a way for us to actually focus on healing. And when we intersect that with technology, and we do that in a very intentioned way, I think that we're looking at a way that we can find something um, that's profitable, because you'll I think you find that ed tech is a pretty big industry.
It
Uh,
is.
and I think that we'll actually find something that's actually serving a purpose that is needed
I
in
love that.
communities. Yeah,
Yeah. So, and one of the things, and what you're saying here is really resonating with me because what I'm looking at currently is how we navigate this transition from the world of, highways, appliances, petrochemicals,
yeah,
spread out, everybody's in your car all the time,
yeah,
to this digital world that is going to be a revolution. We're seeing products become dematerialized. We're seeing things. And what's interesting about it is if you look at it through the lens of economics, right, where in economics, they've got this idea that the product, the productivity enhancing parts of the economy tend to be, up to now, have tended to be, mechanized, less input for more output, blah, 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 blah. And the humanities, and, really, when you think about it, all the things that make life worth living, music, joy, theater, things that are these intangible qualities are not part of the productivity sectors. So
Right.
I think we need to really be getting our heads around is how do we navigate this transition, but give the proper place to these things that are really human. And one of the possible upsides for AI is maybe that gives us more incentive to put more humanity into things.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think I was talking to some of my colleagues, and I said, I feel like in this moment there's going to be this kind of a strange outcome, if you will, for example, Hollywood and, say, for example, Broadway or regional theaters around the country, right? Because I think that the more these systems become so real. I mean, even right now, I think most people wouldn't really be able to tell a good AI video from, a good actual film that someone's recording, right? It's really become that good that quick. And I suspected that it would. So like people, I think, will begin to hunger for what that I don't want to call it nostalgia, but I think theater, for example, will become more valuable, right? Because people will begin to see, oh my God, there's really some value in me knowing that person is right there and they are actually in that story and telling us this thing, right? We're having a type of experience that no matter how immersive you become, right? That touch, that knowing that you're in space with another human being in space and time, like that's going to become valuable. So all of these things that probably didn't have as much economic value before might actually start to skyrocket. I'll give you an example. The same thing is true with music, right? That's why they're able to charge thousands of dollars for a live music ticket, right? Because music became so proliferated, with the MP3, it lost its actual value, but it did, in terms of a physical product. But that human experience, right? That I'm gonna go see Sade live, right? Or I'm gonna go see my favorite, artist live. That has so much value to a person that they are willing to spend, you can, I mean, thousands of dollars, per ticket, you know. Uh,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so I think that will come, and it's also a great opportunity for ways in which we think, like, how is this product going to be used, and I think that for training, um AI is well, I think for training, VR and these systems are going to be enormously valuable. I think most people will probably find ways that they will be able to make training more accessible, right? I think we can use these devices to connect with each other, the same way that people do, like I said, connect with family, right? 1,000 miles away. Like there's a benefit to that. But I think that the core of our humanity is going to be understanding that we can't exist on that alone,
Right.
right? We
Absolutely.
can't exist on that alone. And so I think that there has to be a balance. And I think the more that we understand what that equilibrium is, the more successful we will be. I think when we are not opening ourselves up to what the humanities can offer, you're kind of actually limiting your own growth.
Oh, I totally agree. So what's next for you? What are
Oh
you
wow,
doing now?
yeah. Next for me. So I have taken this time to uh, be able to write music, because I love writing pieces, writing musicals. I'm working on, I always love children's content, so I'm working on that too, developing an animate. Now that animation has come down a little bit, maybe I'll make a little animated film or something. But right now we're working on Honor and Heal, and Honor and Heal is we are going to various communities. We're starting to build in Detroit because we found that Detroit is really a city that is just um, thriving and rebuilding itself.
Mhm.
And so we want to be able to take our workshop into various communities. I've got the first, that prototype software. We got that developed. So I'll be working and I'll be teaching courses in VR next semester, which I'm very excited about.
That
Uh,
should be fun.
yeah, and I'm gonna go take my daughter to the swimming pool.
And she's little, right?
She's 19 months, and
Oh,
so we're gonna hop in the swimming pool.
what an adorable age. Well, how can
Yeah.
people learn more about your world?
So they can certainly go to my website, chesneysnow.com. I have my projects there. My projects are there. You can click on my music or kindness is my superpower, which is kind of my motto, and that has a lot of my projects and work. And you can get in touch with me. You can get in touch with me there, or you can contact me at chesneysnow@princeton.edu.
That's awesome. Well, this time has just flown. I'm glad we made this conversation
Me
happen.
too. It was so great. I probably talked too much. I can't
No,
wait to chat with you again, or maybe we can go to Roots out
yeah,
here.
we should do that. So, I ended up in Princeton almost by accident. So
What?
I was actually doing my PhD at Wharton. And,
Wow.
and my husband, who was earning all the money for our collective enterprise when this happened, was working in New York. So we sort of dropped a pin on the map, and whoa, there was
Yeah.
Princeton.
Well, it's isn't it beautiful though? I mean, like it's really great. So I'll tell you what, me and you, we go get a glass of wine and some food over at Roots.
That sounds great. Well, Chesney Snow, it has been a privilege chatting to you, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about your work.
All right, it's been an honor. Thank you, Rita. Take
Okay.
care.
Bye.